start out with this morning. What caused you to decide to become a Christian? Now think about it for just a moment. What transpired in your heart at the day or the moment that you made that decision? And what led up to that point? What factors were very important in causing you to analyze that point of needing to make that decision? I know that for some of you, not having grown up in the church, that was a very heavy decision to make. One in which you had to stop and evaluate your past a whole lot. And there are things that you are looking at, probably saying, I had to stop thinking this way, I had to cut ties here, I had to do certain things. But what opened your eyes to the thought of even thinking that direction? Now turn to Acts chapter 22, and we're going to look at that this morning. The conversion of an interesting fellow whose name at this point was Paul, but before his time was called Saul. Now, as you think about your conversion story, however you became a Christian, there's probably something that's well seated in your mind. And likely you have shared it maybe with a few people, maybe with several people. Maybe some of you, in fact, because it was a very crucial thing in your life, and you look back and you say, I've told several people about this because it's not only meaningful to me, but I think it helped them to relate to the idea of considering that themselves. Now I want you to think about what we're going to be looking at here, because this is going to be about the story of a guy named Saul who converts to become a Christian and later becomes the Apostle Paul. In fact, in Acts chapter 22, he's already the apostle and he's out on a missionary journey, and he's in fact relating what happened to him. Interesting is that God takes this story of Saul becoming Paul, and 3 times in the book of Acts tells us about that. No telling how many different times Paul related that story to individuals, possibly in reaching out to private or to public people. But the Holy Spirit now, guiding Luke to write this event here, says this is a story worth learning something from. I'm going to tell it in Acts chapter 9. I'm going to tell it in 22, where we're going to read here in a moment. And then later in Paul's life, I'm going to tell it one more time. I think conversion stories are important, and they're being repeated here. And there's a reason, you see, being repeated here. Now let's read this section here together. Chapter 22, starting at verse 1. And I want you to open your Bibles. I want you to read it yourself from God's Word. I don't want you to trust me. I want you to trust what you're reading. If in fact I'm reading what's said there, then trust what I'm saying, only for the fact that it comes from God's Word. But he's relating this to us. So Paul says, quoting around this, "Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now." And when they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. And then he said, "I am indeed a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up at this city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictest of our fathers' laws, and was zealous toward God as you are today. I persecuted this way, capital W, to death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. As also the high priest bears witness with me, and all the council and the elders, from whom I also received letters to the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were in Jerusalem to be punished. Now it happened, as I journeyed and came near Damascus, at about noon, suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me. And I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" So I answered, "Lord, who are you?" And he said to me, "I am Jesus, of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. So I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, arise and go to Damascus, and there you will be told the things which are appointed for you to do. And since I could not see for the glory of the light, being led by the hand of those who were with me, I came into Damascus. Then a certain Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good testimony with all the Jews who dwelt there, came to me, and he stood and he said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that same hour I looked at him. And then he said to me, the God of your fathers has chosen you, that you should know his will and see the just one, capital J, capital O, speaking of Jesus, and hear the voice of his mouth. For you will be his witness to all men of what you have seen and heard. And now why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Now it happened that when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, then I was in a trance, and I saw him saying to me, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, for they will not receive your testimony concerning me. So I said, Lord, they know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by, consenting to his death and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then he said to me, depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles. Got a few questions to ask this morning based upon what's going on here. Questions I think that are important for us to ask ourselves as we look at a lesson that God's giving us 3 times about this conversion. And he's asking us to think, I think, about these things. So as we're looking at what's going on, I ask question number 1 to start with. How passionate are your beliefs? When we look at verses 3 through 5, this man who was named Saul at one time, he was born in Tarsus of Cilicia, brought up at the feet of Gamaliel according to the strictest of the father's laws, and zealous, it says, he said, verse 4, I persecuted the way to death, finding and delivering in prisons both men and women, and the high priest aware of it. That was Paul's, back in that day, Saul's passion about his beliefs. In error, but passionate. So as we look at our life, first of all, let's ask ourselves, as Paul is raising this as an important point of comparison, because he's comparing his compassion to those who are trying to persecute him now. And the question arises, how passionate are your beliefs? Oh, I go to church every Sunday. How passionate are your beliefs? I pray at every meal, and I stop and give thanks for other things too. How passionate are your beliefs in comparison? Tom Brokaw has written a book entitled The Greatest Generation. It's about the men who lived during the time of World War II. Men who rose up and left cornfields and farms and maybe some factories at that time, enlisted in the service as World War II began, and came back and changed our entire world. Not only the United States, but what affects that, the rest of the world. And there's this story in there I find rather interesting and compares well to this. He said that back in his hometown, there was an older gentleman down at the post office. And he was in his 30s, much later in life. He'd been in World War II. And he was griping and complaining, or just murmuring about the young men growing up in the city and some of the destruction they were having. And one of the people in the post office said to the man, said, oh, come on now. He says, you were young yourself, you know, what did you do at 17? He said, at 17, I stormed Normandy. The beaches of Normandy. Wow, what a comparison. in the lives of one who takes life this way and just does whatever, and another one is very serious about life and death situations. Passionate in his belief. How passionate, how truly passionate are your beliefs? I think God is asking us as he makes the comparison. Saul, although he was an heir, was compassionate, or passionate rather, at his beliefs. Talking to people who felt like they were passionate, he says, I'm even more so. So we'll compare just for a moment here and stop and ask ourselves the question. Saul, he says, this is where I'm at. How about you? There's an individual named J.M. McCaleb. That name might ring a bell to you. Born in the mid-1800s, J.M. McCaleb, a little bit later in life after he was married, went to Japan to do mission work. With a $50 contribution plus a few cents more, launches out to go to Japan. Now this is not 1982, this is 1892. So here he goes, getting on a boat with his wife, heading out. And the promise of his support comes from girls who had grown up, who he taught in grammar school, who promised when they sold eggs, they would send him some money. So his monthly support depended on how well the chickens were laid. Truly. How passionate are your beliefs? J.M. McCaleb spent 50 years working in the field of Japan. And only because of bad health and age did he return back to the United States. He tutored Japanese for 5 cents a day while there in order to survive. During the earlier time, when they had emperor worship, he refused to put out the emperor's flag and was tortured and persecuted because of it. Later, he would write a book, From Idols to God. He comes back to the United States, and somewhere in the process of time, he writes a song. The gospel is for all. First phrase, of one the Lord has made the race. Through one has come the fall. Where sin is gone must go his grace. The gospel is for all. Say not the heathen are at home, beyond we have no call. For why should we be blessed alone? The gospel is for all. Received ye freely, freely give. From every land they call. For unless they hear, they cannot live. The gospel is for all. He spent 50 years demonstrating his passion for God. How passionate are your beliefs? Number two, looking at this individual whose name was Saul in chapter 22, the question would be, how wrong can you be? It's so amazing how this all transpires. As the Apostle Paul now is relating what he did. Verse 4, he says, I persecuted this way to death. Verse 5, I went to the high priest, received counsel from elders, from letters from the brethren, to go even to Damascus. He wasn't satisfied in persecuting in the city that he lived in. He's going out to other cities to bring in chains those who would be punished. How wrong can you be? I asked myself the question again last night that I've asked before. If God had not intervened in the life of Saul, would he have changed? Well, you could say, well, we really don't know. The gospel is powerful. Yes, it is. But I'm thinking God's implying probably not. How wrong can you be in your beliefs? How far off track, even in a pursuit of actually saying, I'm doing this for God, How many people around the world are doing things in the name of God or Allah or whatever they want to call it, or in the name of business or family or for themselves or their friends or whatever? How passionate can you be but yet be so wrong? I have a friend who did mission work in Argentina. His name is Richard Pruitt. He worked in another city, but we oftentimes crossed paths and we would talk back and forth. I actually had an opportunity to go to his house, and we spent a little time fishing. I'm not a fisherman, but I love hanging out with Richard. We're sitting in a boat, and we're talking about Christianity. And both Richard and I have one thing in common, is that we didn't grow up in the church. And Richard starts relating to me what happened. He says, you know, as a teenager and in the college years, he says, I was an alcoholic. And I said, oh, really? I said, my father was there. He says, no, I mean, I'm serious. He said, every night I was getting drunk with my buddies. He said, you know, in fact, we got out one night and we were so drunk and we were riding the car and crashed. He says, I wound up in the hospital. He says, in traction like you wouldn't believe. One leg up one direction, an arm on a wooden plate around. He says, and I was there in bed in the hospital, and I and my friends come by and sneak whiskey in, and we were getting drunk there in the hospital room after the accident that caused all of this. And he said, how stupid was I? And I guess likely the question grows, how wrong can you be and never realize how crazy you're doing things? Richard later related what caused him eventually to become a Christian. But he said it took a lot to convince him. Richard's still working for the Lord and doing a lot of things. But I remember his favorite song above all. His grace reaches me. As he thinks back of all the things that he did wrong, and all the people that he led astray, and all the things that of his alcoholism that kept people going in different directions, not toward God, his grace reached him. I think today about where we're at and where some of us are. But it doesn't matter really how far you've gone away. What matters is, are you willing to change and let God's grace reach you? And really, it doesn't matter how close you are if you're not there with God. If your heart really isn't in it. If you've never really been baptized for the forgiveness of sins. You know, there were a lot of people that were close to Jesus, watching him be crucified. A soldier looking up as all the events were taking place and saying, surely this must be the Son of God. How close they were, but how wrong they were. In John chapter 3, Jesus speaks to a man who was a leader of God's people. And when the man came to Jesus at night, Jesus very pointedly and directly said, unless a person be born again, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And the person kind of confused about it, said, how can that be? And Jesus said, unless one is born of the water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And yet we have a lot of people claiming they're doing this all in different ways, but how wrong can you be and yet still be wrong? One other question. What is the answer for changing the life? As we're moving through the story here about this man named Saul who becomes Paul, in verses 7, 8, 9, and 10, he talks about the blinding light in verse 6 that came down at noon. And so he cries out, what's going on? And Saul, of course, Jesus speaks out and says, why are you persecuting? And Saul does not know who it is necessarily, but he still calls him Lord because he's in command. Who are you, Lord? And when Jesus comes back and says, I am Jesus, I just wonder at that moment, what must have run through the mind of Saul? Oh, man, I've been doing all of this totally the wrong way. How wrong can I be And then he comes back with his question. Verse 10. So I said, Lord, what shall I do? What is the answer for changing your life? The answer comes with a question. Lord, what shall I do? Up until this time, Saul had been seeking answers from his friends, from the high priest, from his confusion of error, and all these different things. And finally, he comes down to saying, Lord, what do I need to do? We seek too often answers from the wrong people. Oh, good people, maybe passionate people, friendly people, family related. But the question for changing your life, for giving you direction, for giving you value, for making things right with you and God is, Lord, what do I do? In the name of so many things, we choose our paths. We make our decisions. And so we head out on the road and we go where we think we want to go and let our emotions lead us or our passions lead us and all these things. And yet, are you considering what God says about the whole thing? And so finally, he comes with the right question to the right person. Lord, what do I need to do? And so maybe you're coming to church every Sunday and you're following along and you're going through the routines and all of these things. But the question is, what does God want you to do with your life? Besides come to church on Sunday morning and maybe Sunday night and Wednesday. And much, much more than that, because it comes down to what's happening here is how passionate are your beliefs? Are you still in the wrong category here? Because Saul was full of all of these things, and it was taking him entirely the wrong direction. And so God relates this story once, twice, and a third time to cause every one of us as individuals to stop and say, okay, God, what do you want me to do? I want to be passionate. I want to do this right, and so I'm asking you. Not anybody else today. Just God, me and you. What am I about? So after looking at all this and thinking about this, finally, this is how I do sometimes. I come up with a sermon at the very end. I say, what's the title? Because I'm never really sure. I want the lesson to come out and then God to tell me. And the title is, What Does It Take? What does it take to cause us to have passion? What does God really need to do in your life to open your eyes? Bright light? Probably not going to come. But things can happen to awaken you. Sometimes words from a sermon. Sometimes the comment maybe of a 2-year-old just at the right moment to cause you to stop and say, wow, sounds like me. And God speaking through other people saying things. What does it take? Some people hear the word cancer and they start asking themselves and re-examining life. Some a near death of a friend or relative, and they stop and look at their own life. So look at the path that you're on, as Paul did, and say, what does it take for me to open my eyes and ask the right question from the right person? Lord, what do you want of me? And maybe this morning, there are some here that are totally going the wrong direction. I know you're here. You can be here and still be going the wrong direction. Been there. I've talked to people who've been there. It's no fun being there. And the invitation song is sung, and I said, I've talked to somebody who says, every time I stand up, he says, I reach down and I grab a hold of the pews in front of me, and I'm just holding tight like I can't turn loose. But if you let loose and let God, you get your answers. And it gives you direction. And it gives you hope. What does it take? We sing a song. Think about it. How passionate are your beliefs? What does it take to help you to see if you're going the wrong direction, to open your eyes? And if the answer is, I'm not sure, then come to the Lord and get an answer. And if you know where you're going and it's not been the right way, then come and get the answer. Jesus. If you've never been baptized for the remission of your sins, then forget about what everybody else has been telling you and listen to what God says. The words of Peter in Acts chapter 2, when he was asked, what do I need to do? And his answer was, repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. And you'll receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And this promise is not just to you, but to your children and to all those who are far off. And that means you and I too. Same promise, same hope, same opportunity. Heaven can be yours. Are you hearing? Are you thinking? Do you want to change? Come while we stand.
The one the Lord has made.